After decades of mistrust,
states like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
animosity,
It is America and their agents who promote terrorism.
That's why we have to focus on the real problem, not to waste our time listening to what they say.
But do you personally still believe that you are the only man who can hold Syria together and the only man who can put an end what the world calls a civil war?
We have to look at it from two aspects. The first aspect is the Constitution, and I have my authority through the Constitution. According to this authority and to the Constitution, I have to be able to solve the problem. But if we mean it that you don't have any other Syrian who can be president, no. Any Syrian could be president. We have many Syrians who are eligible to be in that position. You cannot link the whole country only to one person always.
You're fighting for your country. Do you believe that you are the man who can put end to the conflict and restore peace?
I have to be the man who can do that, and I hope so. I have. But it's not about the power of the president. It's about the whole society. The fight now is not the president's fight. It's Syrians' fight. Every Syrian is involved in defending his country now.
It is. And a lot of civilians are dying as well in the fighting. So if you were to win this war, how would you reconcile with your people after everything that has happened?
Let's be, again, more precise. The problem is not between me and the people. I don't have a problem with the people, because the United States is against me. The West is against me. Many Arab countries, including Turkey, which is not Arab, of course, against me. And if the Syrian people are against me, how can I be here?
They're not against you. They're not against you.
If the whole world, or let's say a big part of the world, including your people against you, are you a Superman? No, you're just a human being. So this is not logical. So it's not about reconciling with the people. And it's not about reconciliation between the Syrian and the Syrian. You don't have civil war. It's about terrorism and support coming from abroad to support terrorists to destabilize Syria. This is our war.
Except for terrorism, which everyone believes takes place in Syria, there's also a lot of confession-based strife. For example, we all heard about the mother who has two sons. One son is fighting for the government forces, another one is fighting for the rebel forces. How is this not a civil war?
You have division, but division doesn't mean civil war. It's completely different. Civil war should be based on ethnical problem or sectarian problem. Sometimes you may have sectarian or ethnical tension, and tension doesn't mean problem. So if you have division in the same family or in a bigger tribe or whatever, or in the same city, it doesn't mean civil war. This is completely different. What the people think is the right thing. So what they think, we have to ask them. But I don't have this information right now. So again, I'm not afraid about what they think about me. I'm afraid about my country. We have to be focused on that.
Okay. There has been so many stories about almighty Syrian army, omnipotent Syrian secret services. But then we see that, the government forces aren't able to crush the enemy like people expected it would. And we see terrorist attacks take place in the middle of Damascus almost every day. Were there myths about the Syrian army and about the strong Syrian secret services?
Usually when you have army, when you have secret intelligence, these things should focus on external enemy, not internal enemy. Even if you have internal enemy like terrorism, you have society that could help you, at least not to provide the terrorists with incubator. In that case, it's a new kind. We have a new kind of war. Terrorism through proxies, either Syrians living in Syria or foreigner fighters coming from abroad. So it's a new style of war. This is first. So you have to adapt with this new style. It takes time. It's not easy.
Okay.
Support that they've been had, that's been offered to those terrorists in every aspect, armaments, money, political, is unprecedented. So you have to expect that it's going to be tough war and difficult war. You don't expect a small country like Syria to defeat all those countries that have been fighting us through proxies just in days or weeks. Those terrorists fighting from within the cities. In the cities you have civilians. When you fight this kind of terrorists, you have to be aware that you should do the minimum damage, and you have to fight. You cannot leave terrorists just killing and destroying. So this is the difficulty in these kinds of war.
the infrastructure, military infrastructure, economy is suffering. It's almost as if like Syria is going to fall into decay very soon, and the time is against you. In your opinion, how much time do you need to crush the enemy?
You cannot answer that question because no one claimed that he had the answer about when to end the war, unless we have the answer when they're going to stop smuggling foreign fighters from different part of this world, especially the Middle East and the Islamic world, and when they're going to stop sending armaments to those terrorists. If they stop, this is where I can answer you. I can tell you in weeks you can finish everything. It's not a big problem. But as long as you have continuous supply in men and armaments and everything else and logistics, it's going to be a long-term war.
Well, if you look at the conflict, if you zoom out and look at the conflict the way it began, there is a government in Syria that is objectionable to certain elements of Syrians, and the uprising spread very rapidly with the support of neighbouring powers. Mm-hmm. The narrative that was put forward was that this was an internal uprising, a revolution against the government, and then then we got ISIS, and then you had Al-Qaeda and various other elements, and now we are hearing a lot about the fight against ISIS, but the real objective seems to be the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. But if he goes, as I've said many times on your program, Peter, Syria falls apart.
Also, when you think about it, you have 4,000 kilometers of loosely controlled borders, so you have your enemy that can at any time cross over Jordan or Turkey, rearm, get medical care, and come back to fight you.
Exactly.
How exactly you deal with
no country in the world can seal the border. Sometimes they use this word, which is not correct. Even the United States cannot seal its border with Mexico, for example. Mm-hmm. Maybe the same for Russia, which is a big country. So no country can seal the border. You can only have better situation on the border when you have good relation with your neighbors. Mm-hmm. Something that we don't have, at least with Turkey now. Turkey support more than any other country the smuggling of armaments and terrorists.
Can I ask you something? I've been in Turkey recently, and people there are actually very worried that war will happen between Syria and Turkey. Do you think a war with Turkey is a realistic scenario?
Rationally, no, I don't think in that regard, for two reasons. The war needs public support, and the majority of the Turkish people don't need this war. So I don't think any rational official would think about going against the will of the public in his country. The same for the Syrian people. So it's not the conflict or the difference is not between the Syrian people and the Turkish people. It's about the government and the official, between our official and their official because of their politics. So I don't see any war between Syria and Turkey in the horizon.
When is the last time you spoke to Erdogan, and how did the talk end?
May 2011, after he won the elections.
So you just congratulated him?
Yeah, just
and that was the last time?
It was the last time.
Who is shelling Turkey? The government forces or the rebels?
In order to find the answer, you need a joint committee between the two armies in order to know who shell who. Because on the borders you have a lot of terrorists who have mortars, so they can do the same. Mm-hmm. You have to go investigate the bomb itself, the place, and so on. And that didn't happen. We asked the Turks, the Turkish government, to have this committee. They refused. So you cannot have the answer. But when you have these terrorists on your border, you don't exclude them from doing so, because the Syrian army doesn't have any order to shell the Turkish land, because we don't find any interest in this, and we don't have any enmity with the Turkish people. We consider them as brothers, so why to do it? Unless that happens by mistake, you need the investigation. So far we don't have the answer. Because
so you accept that it may be mistakenly from the government forces?
That could happen. This is a possibility. In every war you have mistakes. You know, in Afghanistan, they always talk about friendly fire. Mm-hmm. If you can kill your soldier. So that it means in every war that could happen. Mm-hmm. But we cannot say.
It's not just the West that opposes you at this point. You have so many enemies in the Arab world. Why? And that's to say, like 2 years ago, when someone heard your name in the Arab world, they would straighten their ties. And now on the first occasion, they betray you. Why do you have so many enemies in the Arab world?
They're not enemies. Some of them, the majority of the Arab governments support Syria in their heart. but they don't dare to say that explicitly.
Why not?
Under pressure by the West, sometimes under pressure by the petrodollar in the Arab world.
Who supports you from the Arab world?
Many countries support Syria by their heart, but they don't dare to say that explicitly. But first of all, Iraq. Iraq plays a very active role in supporting Syria during the crisis because it's a neighboring country, and they understand and they recognize that if you have war inside Syria, you will have war in the neighboring country, including Iraq. I think other countries, they have a good position like Algeria, Oman, mainly. Those are the countries. And other countries, I wouldn't count all of them, but I would say they have positive position, but without taking actions.
Saudi Arabia and Qatar, why are they so adamant about you resigning, and how would an unstable Middle East fit their agenda?
Let's be frank, I cannot answer on their behalf. They have to answer that question. But what I could say, that the problem between Syria and many countries, whether in the Arab world or regional or in the West, that we keep saying no when we think that we have to say no. That's the problem. And some countries, they believe that they can control Syria through orders or through money or petrodollars, and this is impossible in Syria. This is the problem. Maybe they want to play a role. We don't have a problem. They can play a role. Whether they deserve or not, they can play a role. But not to play a role at the expense of our interests.
But is it about controlling Syria or about exporting their vision of Islam to Syria?
You cannot put it as a government policy sometimes. Sometimes you have institutions in certain countries. Sometimes you have personnel who try to promote this, but they don't announce it as official policy. So they didn't ask us to promote their, let's say, extremist attitude of their institutions. But that happens. In reality, that happens, whether through indirect support of their government or through the foundation from the institution and the personnel. So this is part of the problem. But when I want to talk as government, I have to talk about the announced policy. The announced policy is like any other policy, that it's about interests, it's about playing a role. But we cannot ignore what you mentioned. Please.
Iran, which is a very close ally, also exposed to economic sanctions, also facing a threat of military invasion. If you were faced with an option, cut ties with Iran in exchange of peace in your country, would you go for it?
There's no contradiction. I don't have this contradicting option. Why? Because we had good relation with Iran since '79 till today, and it's getting better every day. But at the same time, we are moving toward the peace, and we had peace process, we had peace negotiations. Iran wasn't a factor against peace. So this is misinformation they try to promote in the West, that if we need peace, we don't have to have good relation with Iran. There's no relation. It's completely two different subjects. Iran supported Syria, supported our cause, the cause of the occupied land, and we have to support them in their cause. That's very simple. Iran is a very important country in the region. If we are looking for stability, we need good relation with Iran. You cannot talk about stability while you have bad relation with Iran, with Turkey, with your neighbors, and so on. This is it.
Do you have any information that the Western intelligence are financing rebel fighters here in Syria?
No, so far what we know that they are offering the knowledge support of the terrorists through Turkey, sometimes in Lebanon, mainly. But we have the other intelligence, not the Western, in the region. Some of them are very active, more active than the Western, under the supervision of the Western intelligence. What's
the role of Al-Qaeda in Syria at this point? Are they controlling any of the rebel coalition forces?
No, I don't think they're looking to control. They look to have their own, let's say, kingdom or emirat in their language. But mainly now they try to scare the people through explosion, assassination, suicide bombers, things like this, to push the people toward desperation and to accept them as a reality. So they go step by step. But their final aim is to have this, let's say, Islamic emirate in Syria, where they can promote their own ideology in the rest of the world.
From those who are fighting you and those who are against you, who would you talk to?
We talk to anyone who has genuine will to help Syria, but we don't waste our time with anyone who wants to use our crisis for his own personal interest.
When is the last time you've spoken to a Western leader?
Before the crisis.
It was before the crisis.
Before the crisis.
Were there any time at which they tried to give you conditions that if you left the post of presidency, then there will be peace in Syria, or no?
No, with me directly, no. But whether they propose that directly or indirectly, it's a matter of sovereignty. Only the Syrian people will talk about this. Whoever talk about this in the media, in a statement, directly or indirectly, has no meaning and has no weight in Syria. So, no.
But, you know, do you even have a choice? Because from what it seems from the outside, even if you wanted to go, you wouldn't have anywhere to go.
Exactly.
Where would you go if you wanted to leave?
To Syria. I would go from Syria to Syria. This is the only place where we can live. I'm not puppet. I wasn't made by the West to go to the West or to any other country. I'm Syrian. I'm made in Syria, and I have to live in Syria and die in Syria.
Do you think that at this point there could be talks or diplomacy, or we've reached a stage where only the army can do the thing?
I always believe in diplomacy. I always believe, and I always believe in dialogue, even with people who doesn't understand, who doesn't believe in dialogue. You have to keep trying. Whether you succeeded or not, I think you always have partial success. You have to look for this partial success before you achieve the complete success. But you have to be realistic. You don't think that only dialogue can make you achieve something, because those people who commit these acts, there are two kinds. One of them doesn't believe in dialogue, especially the extremists. And you have the outlaws who have been convicted by the court years ago before the crisis. And their natural enemy is the government, because they're going to be detained if you had a normal situation, let's say. The other part of them is the people who has been supplied by the outside. And they can only be committed to the people or to the governments who pay them the money and supply them with armament. They don't have choice, they don't have decision, they don't own their own decision. So you have to be realistic. And you have the third part of the people, whether he's militants or politicians, who can accept the dialogue. That's why we've been in this dialogue for a month now, even with militants. And many of them give up their armaments and they went back to their normal life.
Do you think a foreign invasion is imminent?
I think the price of this invasion, if it's happened, is going too big, more than the whole world can afford. Because if you have problem in Syria, and we are the last stronghold of secularism and stability in the region, and coexistence, let's say, it will have a domino effect that will affect the world from the Atlantic to the Pacific. I don't think the West is going in that regard. But if they do so, nobody can tell what's next.
One of the things that really I find very troublesome is that this war and the civil war in Syria can be wound down if there was the political will to do so. But that's not Washington's goal. Its goal is regime change, and to change it in favor of somebody they want, they like, they support, and will be dependent on Washington. We're nowhere near that right now, and that's why this war continues to grind on. Russia, on the other hand, and its allies are doing its best to end hostilities in Syria and to regain control of the entire country, the sovereign borders here. Very different agendas here.
Mr. President, do you blame yourself for anything?
Normally, you have to find mistakes. You do it with every decision. Otherwise, you're not a human.
What's your biggest mistake?
I don't remember, to be frank, now. But I always, even before taking the decision, I have to consider that part of it will be wrong. But you cannot tell about your mistake now. Sometimes, especially during crisis, you don't see what's right and wrong until you overcome the situation that you are in. So I wouldn't be objective to talk about mistakes now, because you're still in the middle of the.
So you don't have regrets yet?
Not now, as it. When everything is clear, you can talk about your mistake, but you definitely have mistake. That's no.
If today was 15th of March 2011, that's when the protests started to escalate and grow, what would you do differently?
What I would do what I did.
Exactly
the
the
15th
same.
of March, exactly the same. To ask the different parties to have dialogue and to stand against the terrorists, because that's how it started. It didn't start as marches. The cover was, the umbrella was marches, but within those marches you had militants who started shooting the civilians and the army at the same time. Maybe on the tactical level you could have done something different, but as president you're not tactical. You always take the decision on strategic level, which is different.
President al-Assad, how do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
In 10 years, through my country, I cannot see myself. I can see my country in 10 years' time. This is where I can see myself. More
Do you see
stable.
yourself in Syria?
Definitely. I have to be in Syria. It's not about the position. I don't see myself whether president or not. That's not my interest. I could see myself in this country, safe country, stable country, more prosperous country.
President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, thank you for talking to our team.
Thank you for coming to Syria again.
Mr. Putin said that they have to give the Libyan people time to sort out their own problems, and there's really double standards here, he added. There are several other parts of the region in the Middle East and North Africa which is facing pretty much civil war situations, but which the West is either ignoring or not really paying the same amount of attention to.
Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, and Iraq monopolize a lot of the headlines these days, but they're not the only groups at war. How many wars are happening right now? Well, currently there are 10 active wars and 8 active military conflicts worldwide. We're limiting the scope here to wars only. According to American University professor Joshua Goldstein, wars include any ongoing violent conflict between 2 or more parties where 1,000 people or more have died within a year. In Syria, there are numerous groups fighting, including ISIS, Syrian rebels, and the Syrian government. The war started in 2011 as a movement to oust President Bashar al-Assad and his government. It's currently by far the bloodiest conflict on a day-by-day basis. According to some reports, Bashar al-Assad and his government are committing war crimes against their own people. In Afghanistan, the Afghan government is fighting the Taliban, but violence has slowed recently and international troops are starting to pull out. If everything goes well, there could be an end in sight for this conflict. In Pakistan, the government is fighting with the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups in an autonomous tribal region bordering Afghanistan. This is where numerous terrorist groups have set up training facilities and hideouts. The Pakistani government has had some success, but the operation is far from over. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, there has been constant conflict since 1998, with everyone from Joseph Kony to the perpetrators of the genocide in Rwanda involved. The country is in turmoil, and there is no end in sight. South Sudan successfully seceded from Sudan in 2011, and since then a civil war has broken out in South Sudan along ethnic lines, with the Dinkas fighting on behalf of the current president and the Nuers fighting on behalf of the former vice president. The area is also experiencing famine, which is making the entire situation much worse. In Libya, the Libyan government is facing factional violence stemming from the downfall of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011 and the civil war that followed. They do have an interim government in place, but little can be done to stop the fighting. In Ukraine, the Ukrainian government is currently fighting Russian-backed separatists for the eastern part of Ukraine. There are some reports that Russia is also directly involved in the fighting. The remaining 3 active wars are in Iraq, Israel, Palestine, and Nigeria. Once again, Boko Haram has made news by kidnapping women and children in Nigeria. Now, as we all know, they're a terrorist group, so it's often easy for me to replace the actual group name, Boko Haram, with the generic post-9/11 understanding of the word terrorist. I know this is just my instinct to group things together to make them easier to understand, but I'd like to think I can handle more than just the one-word explanation, terrorist. So who are the Boko Haram? Well, first off, their real name is not Boko Haram. That's just what the local people call them. Roughly, it means Western Education Forbidden, but the actual group's name is the Congregation of the People of Tradition for Proselytism and Jihad. That is how they self-identify, and it says pretty much everything. They are a group of people holding on to traditional Islamic values, spreading and fighting for those values, which on its face doesn't sound all that violent. And initially, they weren't. The group was started by Muhammad Yusuf in 2002 with the intention of creating a true Islamic society under Sharia law, which is the strictest, most literal version of Islam. They were always a radical group, but not necessarily a dangerous one. They were like a tiny motorcycle club of extreme Islamists who'd have occasional and somewhat escalating dust-ups with the authorities. Then, in 2009, everything came to a head. Nigerian security forces killed Yusuf and many of his followers in what the media at the time called the Boko Haram uprising. But Yusuf's followers consider that incident a massacre of their people more than an actual uprising. And that is what turned them into the horrible militant biker gang we have today. Their new leader, Abu Bakr Shekau, has not changed the values of the group at all, but he does have them more focused on the last word in their name, jihad. Specifically, violent jihad against anyone not practicing their exact form of extreme fundamentalism. Basically, they want four things. They want Nigeria to follow their strict version of Sharia law. They want the end of Western education in Nigeria. They want death to anyone who doesn't share their beliefs. And they want to end the current government, which they deem corrupt and blasphemous. So they're very close to exactly what you think they are, terrorists. But these guys have motorcycles and are a tad more concerned with ending Western education than your run-of-the-mill terrorist group. Hence the kidnapping of school children from westernized schools in Nigeria.
A proxy war is a war instigated by a major power which does not itself become involved. And you see that happening now. Basically a hitman. Not a hitman, more of the Don. Because the Don doesn't have his hands dirty, man. Don Slakia basically gets his henchmen to do his dirty work for him. Which is what's going on at the moment. I saw this article. It's a bit of a read. But, you know, I think the history is worth going into, so I'm just going to read through it as quickly as possible. It says, though the United States and Soviet Union have never went to war with each other, they found alternative ways of furthering the Cold War agendas. Both superpowers, along with their partners, sought to influence the political and economic development of smaller nations, right, particularly in second and third world countries in Africa, Asia, Middle East, and South America. They did this in a variety of ways, ranging from providing moral and financial support to friendly political groups and leaders, though through to the supply of arms, equipment, or military training. And civil wars were often prolonged or intensified by foreign involvement. But foreign manipulation and involvement in proxy wars also alleviated US-Soviet tensions and diluted the likelihood of a full-scale nuclear war. I mean, this time around, it's just going to keep building and building and building and building until it pops, until you get a full-scale nuclear war. You know, the war to end all wars. Take a look at Libya, man. NATO intervention, that just basically plunged Libya into a state of absolute anarchy, man. In Syria, in Yemen, in Libya. You know, so the CIA in Ukraine, so the CIA in particular was directly involved in several Cold War era coups that displaced leftist regimes, replacing them with right-wing parties or military juntas, right? You know, look up that word junta, right? It says a military political group that rules a country after taking power by force, right? On September 11th, there's 9/11 again, 1973, the CIA backed a coup d'etat in Chile that overthrew and murdered Allende, replacing him with a military dictator. It sounds like Libya again, Augusto Pinochet. Right? It says more than 40,000 Chileans were arrested and as many as 5,000 either vanished or were murdered in the first months of Pinochet's rule. The US or its allies were also involved in coups or attempted coups in a number of other countries, including Bolivia in 70, Uganda in 71, Argentina in 76, Pakistan in 77, Iran in 79, the Central African Republic in 79, and Turkey in 1980. So, you know, this is a whole load of countries in 10 years, right? And that made me think of the scripture in Habakkuk 2 and 5 says, yea, also, because he transgressed by wine. He's a proud man, neither keepeth at home. This man is always going countries causing uproar for no good reason. That's because this man's blessing is the sword. You know, this is Genesis 27 and 39. It says, and his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it came to pass, and by thy sword shalt thou live. You know, a sword is any killing instrument. When they went to fight Assad, they basically armed a group of people who then became ISIS, and then now they're doing it again. You know, in Libya, they armed a group of random people. They say, oh, we're going to go give them training. You know, they're doing the same thing in Ukraine. Oh, we're going to go and give them training. They're doing the same thing in Iraq. Oh, we're going to go give them... So, you know, you see what this man is about, man. It says, when the US Congress refused further payments to the Contras, Reagan admin raised funds by selling arms to Iran, by now in the hands of Islamic fundamentalists. The Iran-Contra affair, as it became known, scandalized the government, though the blame was largely shouldered by Reagan's subordinates. The Contras conducted a guerrilla war against the Sandinistas government for almost a decade, committing hundreds of murders and other human rights abuses.
We invest in more drones, we invest in more bombs, we invest in more weapons, we invest in more ammunition, we invest in more guys to go out and kill more guys. That's investing in conflict, instead of really taking a serious look and say, what are the big excuses that these guys are using? And if it's lack of, you know, if it's poor economic conditions, if it's poor social conditions, then let's fix those. But those kinds of things aren't going to get fixed overnight. And the leaders of the Middle East have to decide that that's what they want to do. If you look at 2004 and you fast forward to 2014, so only less than a year ago, the number of terrorists, our State Department designated terrorist groups, have doubled. So something is wrong with our policy and our strategy.
And here's what I don't get. When you talk about fixing the underlying problems, when you talk about not investing in conflict as the number one way of dealing with this, I agree with you, and you do sound very reasonable and persuasive. And yet in February, in front of Congress, you said, when we were asked what is to be done, the enemy must be opposed, must be killed, must be destroyed.
Well, Daniel, there have been reports about an EU plan to send army convoys to assist humanitarian aid there in Libya. Of course, there'll be those who say, well, this is really the start of a military ground operation, something, of course, that allies were adamant wouldn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard these rumours for the first time a few weeks ago that the EU plans to send up to 1,000 troops under the guise of so-called humanitarian aid. Russia fears that this will be used to plan an invasion and to carry out an invasion of Libya on the pretext of supporting humanitarian aid to the Libyan people. The draft plan is called U4Libya. It's supported by the 27 member states of the European Union, prepared by them, and it provides for ground troops, in fact, to be deployed by the Western coalition. In the port city of Misrata, which is currently under siege by forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi. Here in Brussels, Michael Mann, the chief spokesman to the European Union High Representative Catherine Ashton, said that they would only send up to 1,000 troops, and the troops would only be used if they came under attack. Otherwise, they would only defend aid. Now, Russia has said that it will only support another UN resolution if it explicitly says that it will not continue the violence, that if it ends the violence and starts negotiations, then that is the only condition under which they would support that. Now, I've been speaking to military analysts here in Brussels, and they confirm that ground troops are already in operation in Libya. This is not being covered by the media in the European Union, but troops are already in operation, and they are pushing forward in Libya with Colonel Gaddafi as the target.
You today about the importance of knowing the truth. And I'm talking about everyone, with very few exceptions. No matter who you are, how many degrees or titles you have, or what faith you espouse, or even if you don't espouse any faith, right now, as a certainty, you do not know the truth. But this was all foretold long, long ago to be the case at this exact time in history. I use many ancient texts to dig out the truth, but one of my favorite is the Bible. Now, I don't use the Bible from a religious perspective, though, because the truth sprinkled throughout the contents of the Bible was never intended to be used for any religion. I use the Bible because I've discovered after hundreds of thousands of hours of linguistic research that the Bible was crafted to be a literal repository of ancient secrets, hidden until this exact time in history.
Folks haven't been reading the Bible.
Hey, listen, I just wanna climb with you. Do you know what we're rising to? Let me vibe with you, wanna take my time with you. Yeah, I make my rhymes for you. Do you know what we're rising to? 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 Let me live for you, so much I wanna give to you. Can't climb, I'ma live for you. You're so weak, but you're so strong. Waiting for weeks, been so long. Do you know what we're rising to? 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 You live for the flow, live so low, received the blow. So I want you to know everything I've been shown, everything I've ever known. I want you to know we're rising to. Do you know what we're rising to? 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 Yeah, I'm versatile and I'm coming up vertical. The end is coming, be it soon, be it midday, be it noon, be it now, blink, blink, be it now. Do you know what we're rising to? Do you know what we're rising to? Do you know what we're rising to? So the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast, yeah, the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast, yeah, the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast, yeah, the mark of the beast is coming, the mark of the beast is coming. It's unescapable.